This is the story of Armavia Flight 967. On the 3rd of May 2006, Armavia Flight 967 was on its way from Yerevan, Armenia, to Sochi in Russia with 113 people on board. At 4:55 p.m., the captain went over the weather prediction for their destination airport of Sochi. The weather was within limits, and he decided that it was safe to continue. At 8:39 p.m., the engines were started, and by 8:47 p.m., the plane took off from Yerevan, bound for Sochi. As the plane climbed, the pilots got a bit of bad news. The controller at the Tbilisi Regional Center gave them the weather for Sochi. It wasn't good. The weather at Sochi was below minima. If the weather did not improve, they wouldn't be able to land. But the plane climbed, and by 9:07 p.m., the plane was at 34,000 feet, its cruising altitude. While still under the control of Tbilisi Regional Control Center, the captain decided to contact Sochi Approach Control to get a first-hand reading of the weather there. The controller at Sochi had bad news. The cloud ceiling for runway 06 was 170 meters, and visibility was 2 kilometers, that is 550 feet by 6,500 feet, respectively. It was pretty much the same thing for runway 02. The pilots inquired if the visibility would improve to 2,500 meters in an hour. If the weather improved in an hour, then they'd be able to hold for a bit and then land. The controller went to check the weather forecasts. The 2-hour forecast said that visibility would drop to 1,500 meters or 4,900 feet. Instead of getting better, the weather was expected to get worse. Their hands were tied. The crew decided to turn back to Yerevan. As they started to make the trip back to Yerevan, they tried the weather at Sochi one more time. This time, the pilots told the controllers at Sochi that they had deputies on board. I guess in this context, deputies are very important people, VIPs, if you will. Here's the thing though, the crew lied. There were no deputies on board. This was just a ploy to get a favorable weather report from the Sochi controller. Soon, the Sochi controller got back to them. The weather had improved. The controller said, Armavia 967, visibility 3600, cloud ceiling 170 for 30 minutes. The weather is around the limit, but okay so far. End quote. The weather was okay. For now. There was no guarantee that it would hold, and with that, they turned back to Sochi. As they flew, they went over the go-around briefing, just a discussion on what they'd do if they had to go around. But things were starting to unravel in the cockpit. The plane was being flown by the autopilot, and the captain couldn't get the plane to descend as fast as he wanted. They thought that there was something wrong with the autopilot, so they disengaged autopilot 2 and switched to autopilot 1. It was 10 p.m., and the plane was in contact with Sochi Approach. The weather was good. Visibility was at 4,000 meters or 13,000 feet. But the controllers noticed that Flight 967 was a bit too high. They told the crew, quote, if able, expedite descent or you'll overshoot the final turn, end quote. They were a bit too high, nothing that couldn't be fixed. By 10:03 p.m., the plane was passing through 12,000 feet and the controller cleared them down to 2,000 feet as they made the turn to final. As the autopilot flew the plane, they went about their approach checklist, but they got some bad news. The visibility was good, but the clouds were too low. The cloud base was at 160 meters or 500 feet. The crew were asked to not descend below 2,000 feet. This pissed the pilots off. As they went through the checklist, they hurled insults at the controller. For example, the captain said, let's extend flaps 1, expletive him. They continued to configure the plane. The flaps were set to 2 and the gear was down. The plane intercepted the glide slope and the plane began to follow that imaginary path down to the runway. The cloud base was at 190 meters, so it looked like they'd be able to land after all. As the autopilot kept the plane on the glide slope, the flaps were fully extended and they were ready to land. Just 7 kilometers from the runway, the crew got the transmission that they had been dreading. Quote, RNV 967 stop descend, cloud 100 meters, turn right, climb 600. The clouds were too low. Weather parameters had been breached. They had to go around. The crew acknowledged and they started to carry out the go around, but the plane starts pitching up quite aggressively. A warning, speed, 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 sounded in the cockpit, letting pilots know that the plane was entering a low energy state. They needed to add more power ASAP. The autopilot tried to bring the nose down to gain back some speed that the plane so desperately needed. The crew, in response to all of this, commanded toga power or max power. The plane was in this right-hand climbing turn, pitching up at 21 degrees, and the autopilot was disengaged by the crew. The captain took control and brought the nose of the plane down, and the plane gained speed. The plane seemed to be under control, even though it was still in the right-hand turn. But then the nose started dropping, and the plane rolled a bit more to the right. As the speed increased, the captain asked the flaps to be retracted. The plane started pitching down more, and the roll to the right worsened. The first officer was asking the captain to level off. The plane continued to dive as it rolled to the right even further. As the plane dived, the pilots tried to save their plane. The roll to the right was lessened, and the rate of descent was brought down. But it was too little, too late. The plane impacted the water, and no one survived. In every accident, there's a long chain of events that leads up to the crash. In this case, that started well before the plane even got near Sochi. The pilots were intent on landing at Sochi. During the approach briefing, it became apparent that this was their main goal. So when the controller asked them to go around, it created a sort of conflict of motives. They wanted to land at Sochi, and they also did not want to disobey the controller. So when they did go around, they did it half-heartedly. They pushed the engines to climb power and not toga power, and they did not retract the flaps or the landing gear. In essence, they were not mentally prepared to do anything but land at Sochi. The CVR gave more insight into the state of the pilots. Remember that bit of trouble that they had with the autopilot? Well, as it turns out, the autopilot was fine. They thought that the autopilot was not working because it wouldn't descend as fast as they wanted. This was because the autopilot was in descend mode. In this mode, the plane calculates the rate of descent on its own. But the captain did not know that because he did not fully understand the autopilot system. But this had a side effect. This stressed the pilots out even more. This was evident from all the swearing in the cockpit. This stress just kept building and building. Finally, when the controller gave them some bad news about the weather, their stress was on full display. They swore profusely. Flight 967 was making an approach, and the pilots were incredibly stressed. Now, these pilots had to carry out a go-around. The go-around at Sochi required a climbing right turn to 600 meters or 2,000 feet, but the crew made a mistake. The target altitude on the autopilot control panel was set to 3,200 feet instead of the required 2,000 feet. Now, that seems insignificant. That's something that you can fix as you climb. But the automation had a surprise in store. When they commanded a go-around, the plane started pitching up quite aggressively. This was because of the incorrect altitude given to the autopilot. You see, the autopilot calculates the rate of climb on its own. If the difference between the target altitude and their current altitude is less than 1,200 feet, the autopilot puts the plane into a gentle climb. And if that difference is greater than 1,200 feet, then it commands a more aggressive climb to get to that target altitude faster. At the time of the go-around, they were at about 1,100 feet, and since the target altitude was 3,200 feet instead of 2,000 feet, the autopilot pitched the plane up quite a bit. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem, but the pilots messed up the go-around procedure. They did not push the engines to max power. They did not retract the flaps or the landing gear. Now the plane is pitching up a lot. There's a lot more drag on the plane than there should be, and the engines aren't even at max power. You now know why the speed, speed, speed warning came on. But all's not lost. You should be able to recover, add power, retract the flaps, fly the plane. And the crew does some of that, but this warning really caught them off guard. But things at first seemed to be going their way. The autopilot was disengaged, and the captain was flying the right-hand turn manually. Then, during the turn, the plane started pitching down. Nothing was wrong with the plane. It was the captain that was pitching the plane down. A theory as to why he pushed the nose down is that he was experiencing something known as a somatogravic illusion. I talk about this a bit more in my Atlas Air 3591 video. But essentially, forward acceleration can trick your brain into thinking that you're pitching up when you're not. So if the captain was suffering from a somatogravic illusion, he would have pushed the nose down because he thought that they were pitching up. Another theory is that the plane was going quite fast, so there would be red bars on the primary flight display. In the case of a TCAS, or traffic collision and avoidance system warning, pilots are trained to avoid these red bars. The best way to do that is to pitch the plane down. So it is possible that his TCAS training kicked in when he saw those red bars, even though this wasn't a TCAS event. Which theory is more likely in your opinion? Well, for whatever reason, the captain starts pitching the nose down. The first officer realized that something was wrong, and he's trying to correct the right roll of the plane. So the first officer is commanding a roll to the left, and the captain is commanding a roll to the right. Since the first officer had not pushed the takeover button, that button would have given him all the control. The computer now took the average of both inputs. So basically, both pilots canceled each other out. With that, the plane continued to fall. They seemed to realize their mistake in the last few moments of flight. Here's a quote. The combined control actions of the captain and the co-pilot resulted in decrease of the roll angle to almost zero, insignificant increase of the pitch angle to -6 degrees, and decrease of the descent rate to -22 meters per second. End quote. They were so close to saving their plane, but they ran out of altitude. The really sad thing is that they could have recovered the plane during most of the accident sequence. They just needed to do the right things. Why do you think the captain pushed the nose down? Was it a somatogravic illusion, or do you think his training kicked in? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Personally, I think it was the somatogravic illusion. We've had another crash just like this. Gulf Air Flight 072. The similarities are just too eerie. In both cases, there was a failed go-around, a turn out to a dark sea with no external visual stimuli, and incorrect go-around procedures. Like this crew, they couldn't save their plane in time. Let me know if you want a video on Gulf Air 072. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.